was a point in the first half where Pep Guardiola was sort of clawing at his own face in that Edvard Munch's The Stream way that he does, just the City had done something wrong.
And shouted,
relax at his players. And you just think, that's very much do as I say, not as I do there, Pep.
This is Rog, and we are now 36 hours out from a new world reality. Manchester City, treble winners, and the first time in football history that a gilded, state-owned club has won the Champions League. I was actually just on Morning Joe this morning, just come off it literally seconds ago, and they brought me on for reasons I don't fully understand, right after the United Arab Emirates ambassador to the United States, who had his own segment, which made for one fairly staggering pivot. Look, Manchester City are undoubtedly, by far, as their obliterating path to the final through the Bayerns and the Real Madrids proved, the best football team in Europe. And we've talked all season how this is an achievement that needs to be viewed through at least two lenses: the footballing on the field, the geopolitical, and the football business of it. And there's no doubt Manchester City, Pep Guardiola, KDB, that mutant Haaland, and Jack Grealish, DJ Grills deserve so much respect and awe, love, and fear, to go all Chaz, what's his name on you, for what they've accomplished. But there's also a how behind all of this, a how that we still do not know. The facts are still coming into blurry focus. 115 facts, or Premier League accusations in particular. And as the smoke clears on a season that was truly footballingly and legally like none other, it's incredible really to close it with a great friend who was there in Istanbul and paid witness to every brave inter-counter, every Lukaku miss, and every single Grealish rendition of Everywhere by Fleetwood Mac, and there were many. It's a joy to welcome back to this bonus edition of European Nights, presented by Paramount Plus, in one piece, just by the look of things, from your New York Times, and author of the magnificent book Expected Goals. It's Mr. Rory Smith.
I'm surprised that Jack Grealish is a Fleetwood Mac aficionado. I don't want to stereotype, but I would have said, if anything, he's more David Guetta.
Oh, that's so interesting. Don't do DJ Grills like that. Although I do imagine he probably thinks it's Tommy Fleetwood that he's listening to. In fact, I'm almost 100% convinced.
My wife and children would tell you that the defining sound post Istanbul in our household has been the inter-chant. So every run to a final, a team tends to have a chant, and City have got two cracking ones. There's With the Boys in Blue and We're Coming For You, which is a great tune, and there's one about Ake and Edison, which is, as all great chants are, to a 1990s dance hit. But there's an inter one that goes, I think, per tutti che amano soltanto te, per tutti I chilometri che ho fatto per te, internazionali devi vincere. And it is a brilliant chant, and I look forward to it being adopted and ruined slightly by Premier League teams next season.
Man City would no doubt be singing it while doing the Poznan, doing both of them. There was a
holding
up opponents' chants almost as the heads of their slaughtered nemesis. Give me the beat on there was a great pre-game Poznan.
There was a great pre-game Poznan, but I do like the idea of, so among ultra groups, it's traditional that if you capture one of your rivals' flags, you take a picture with yourself holding it upside down. It's insulting. There was a great one from Prague, the Europa Conference League, where I think some Czech ultras seized a West Ham flag, doubtless after some sort of fearsome pitched battle, but it was undercut a little bit by the fact that the West Ham group in question was the Durham University West Ham fans, who are not. Durham University is, a kind of Ivy League school in Britain.
Durham University is essentially, it's like the equivalent of Dartmouth, American listeners. Yeah. It's not that hard.
There are no ultras at Durham University, I think that's fair to say. But I like the idea of adopting a song of your vanquished foes, but then like singing it backwards or singing it deliberately badly. That should be a thing.
If I was a football fan, I would start to design flags that when held upside down spell wankers or bollocks. Like when you held a calculator upside down with certain numbers on it. That's what I'm going to give my time to. Also, when you sing The Boys in Blue, I'm thinking, wow, Everton should sing that next. But then you talked about the disco hit that every team can convey their vibe with. Everton should be relegation sung to celebration. Relegation. Good times, because that's what we got coming for us with our own points deduction, which I'm legally obliged to say, Manchester City fans, and acknowledge before we do dive into this. I also want to say the pre-game Poznan is possibly the most confident, that is just pointing at the bleachers before your team hit a home run. But my lord, Manchester City, the back half of this season, have hit a home run every single time they're at the plate. And we will talk about them. But Raw, first, I want to raise a toast with my third first Bud Light of the day to a final which really was the most spectacular of all three of our children. And we have long revelled in the minutiae of the Conference League on this show. We loved it first. The cities and towns that it opened your eyes to. Many known only previously to those in the international narcotics trade. But as if it needed validation that this tournament is such a bloody wonderful idea. When this tournament was framed, everyone was like, what do we need this tournament for? Well, last season, Roma's first major trophy in 14 years. And this season, David Moyes' first silverware in 25 years of management. West Ham's first major trophy in 43 aching years. And we know football, what's it about? It's not about turning your opponent's flags upside down. It's about making moments of magic. And this Conference League, right, Rory, feels almost democratic in the joy it can provide. Playing when I watch it, a truly rare role and much needed in the modern game. I mean, is it fair to call it the People's Cup, Rory?
I think it's catchy. I think it is the best thing about European football at the moment, to be perfectly honest. That sounds ridiculous, but when it was first announced, there was this skepticism, particularly in the big five nations, the nations that might consider themselves to be home to the likely winners of the Champions League, that it would be tin pot, that it would be a little bit kind of an afterthought, that it would just be lots of pointless games stuffing up the calendar. But what we've seen has been incredibly heartwarming. If you want to see kind of the best side of football, and there were scenes in Prague for the final between West Ham and Fiorentina that were very much not the best side of football. But if you want to see teams competing for something that really matters to them, regardless of how much it is deemed to matter outside, it's the perfect place to go. And ultimately, that's what matters, isn't it? That's what football's about. It's what all sport is about. This seems ridiculous to say, but none of this actually matters. None of it does. It's all pretend. We've made it all up.
And it all matters too much, Raw. None of it matters. All of it matters too much.
But the thing is, like, we speak like the Premier League has some sort of innate meaning that was, passed down from Mount Sinai or whatever. The dinosaurs understood. Those two things can't both be true. But but it's not. They're all just
by dinosaurs. You meant Tarkovsky and Cody.
Exactly, Michael Keane.
But then we can bring that theology to.
We imbue it all with meaning. So we have decided that the Premier League means something, that being champion of England at football means something, that being winning the European Cup means something, that winning the Europa League means something. But it's all pretend. We decide how much everything means. And if you look at the teams who are in the Conference League, it means so much to them. The one thing that I thought they maybe did slightly wrong with the Conference League when they first announced it was admitting teams from the Big Five. I thought that would ruin it. It would skew it. It would end up, with Tottenham or someone sort of cutting a swathe through loads of teams from North Macedonia.
Now that's far-fetched. Why'd you go to such a science fiction angle? Tottenham going all the way to the final.
But you kind of envisaged it being, the seventh best team in England, Germany, Italy and Spain, kind of picking everybody else off. And that's not really materialised. The Belgians and the Dutch have made a real fist of the Conference League, particularly.
Yeah, particularly the Alkmaar fans making a fist of it.
Yeah, Alkmaar fans make a literal fist of it. But I mean, both Genk and Ghent, I think, have made the semi-finals. They may be the same team. It's very hard to say. You've seen these teams from that second tier of countries making. Basel almost got to the final this year from Switzerland. Those tier of teams have made it their own as well. But for the teams in the Big Five leagues who've entered, it has meant so much, and that's because they've decided it means something. They've done it the honour of taking it seriously, and because for so many teams the chances of winning a trophy are so slim now. Obviously, Fiorentina, who lost the final to West Ham, were also in the Coppa Italia final. They're okay at the Coppa Italia generally at the moment. Fiorentina, they might win a domestic cup. West Ham are not going to win a domestic cup realistically at any point in the near future. They're certainly not going to win the league. Ditto for Roma. Roma aren't going to win Serie A. They're not going to win the Champions League. For them, it is a real chance of a genuine, meaningful trophy, and that is precious in football. And I think a lot of people, not us, Rog, just we saw it coming, owe UEFA an apology, because this has been a huge success.
The Conference League, honestly, it's like the Florida Cup, slightly lesser Florida Cup, but it is humanly magnificent. I do want to say I'm so happy for David Moyes. When I looked at his joy with his 87-year-old father, I thought the Frank Sinatra lyrics, for what is a man, what has he got? If not himself, then he has naught. Not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of someone who kneels. Let the record show I took all the blows and did it my way. From that to, well, whatever the opposite of the People's Cup is, the Super League Cup, the Champions League, whatever, Manchester City won, Inter Milan 0. You were there in the Ataturk Olympic Stadium in Istanbul. City that was meant to host this tournament twice before, but had to postpone, and was now able to welcome the world, well, barely. Raw, quick beat on this, because I do want to get to the football. The vibe. Tell us what the vibe was in that city going into this one, bar the chaos, getting to, the actual stadium.
Yeah, Istanbul's an amazing city to host a final, except for where the stadium is. It's so big that you kind of worried that the atmosphere would be lost. But to be honest, that wasn't the case. I was staying in Fatih, which is on the European side, down by the Blue Mosque and Sultanahmet and Topkapi Palace. And I walked up to get the tram over to the Galata Tower to meet some friends on Saturday morning, and you walked through Inter fans, lots and lots of Inter fans, a good number of City fans, but more Inter fans, all mixing happily, queuing to get into the Hagia Sophia, eating, drinking coffee, walking along, taking in the scene, singing. It was a wonderful atmosphere in the city. There's enough space, there's enough kind of accommodation for everyone to spread out, to have room, which is important. I didn't see the fan zones, but I think UEFA had organised that quite well. They'd certainly been conscious of what happened in Paris last year, and they'd urged everyone to get to the stadium, I think 9 hours beforehand. There were fan zones there as well. The problem is the transport. Since 2005, Rod, you'll have to remind me, who won the Champions League in 2005?
I think Everton.
Was it? No, it wasn't Everton. Nearby, but not Everton. In 2005, there was an awareness that the logistics of the stadium were terrible. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's a huge city. There was no public transport, huge traffic. Buses couldn't get through. Fans had to walk miles and miles and miles to get to the stadium and to get home afterwards. You'd have thought that UEFA and the Turkish authorities would have worked that out. They haven't. There was a metro. There is now a metro that runs to the stadium, which I think alleviated some of the pressure. But everything else was the same. Strange policing decisions, inadequate kind of access points. Fans having to abandon taxis and stuff on motorways and walk, fans in wheelchairs having to abandon and cover the final mile and a half, 2 miles, huge queues. A friend of mine who was in with the Inter fans showed me a picture of their exit from the stadium after the game. Obviously, you've got thousands of people trying to leave. Have you ever played tennis on a tennis court? The door to a tennis court, quite small. That was the exit point for several thousand people. That's dangerous.
Some of it made the Luton Town Stadium look really well thought out and planned. And particularly, you speak to fans who went to the game in wheelchairs, just the agony that they had to go through just to support the team that they love. By the way, none of this will happen when the Champions League final is in New York City. I jest.
Well, but the thing is, Rog, this is a really important point. I think we now have to discuss whether UEFA is capable of hosting these events. The Champions League final has grown in size exponentially to the point where, and this is a horrible cliche, it is like the Super Bowl. Now, the NFL, I've never been to a Super Bowl, but I imagine the NFL are good at hosting Super Bowls. They know what to do. They know what is needed. They know how to make it work. UEFA, although this was better than Paris, without question, that is now, I think, excluding the pandemic finals, 4 of the last 5 that have been challenging for UEFA, plus the Euro 2020 final at Wembley. It's not nation specific. Everyone seems to struggle with them. No one struggles more than the French. But I think there has to be now a fairly in-depth conversation about how we make sure that the biggest event in European football isn't run like a tin pot Village Cup final.
Yeah, I mean, fan carnage does not have to be a baked in tradition to this game of delirious joy that's become truly a global game with fans traveling from all over the world for it. And you see the carnage, and you ache for these human beings who just want to love their team. Thousands of fans struggling to get to the stadium, but one City fan had no problems at all getting there in time for kickoff. Although in many ways, it had taken him 13 years to get there. City owner Sheikh Mansour, yes, he turned up for this one, along with his brother, according to Tariq Panja, who spied the United Arab Emirates Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler, there alongside him. Only Sheikh Mansour's second game he's attended in person since buying Manchester City in 2008. He was not at the 2021 Champions League final, which City ultimately lost to Chelsea. But the prospect of this day, this treble, that was the optics win that UAE needed, perhaps encouraged by rival state Saudi Arabia's loud moves in golf and football, which preceded this. What did you make of his sudden appearance to witness this treble that his City project had essentially been set up to churn out?
Yeah, I think that's the crucial thing, is that this is the ultimate realization of everything they've been trying to achieve. Mainly the Champions League by itself, but the treble, I think, made it. It's a statement of dominance. It's a statement of success, and I think to a large extent he probably just wanted to be there to see it. I think there's probably a significant part of it that is that they worked out, Manchester City, Abu Dhabi, that if he didn't go to a final that was perceived as being in his neighbourhood. Now, obviously, the UAE and Istanbul are quite a long distance away, but there is a sense that, look, that's as close as you're realistically that is as close as Man City will realistically play in European competition to the UAE. So if you can't even make that game, the biggest game of the year, that's when questions are asked. So I think there was an optics thing that they had to be there, and I also think there was a kind of regional power thing that we've seen in recent years, increasingly, that Manchester City is a site of diplomacy for the UAE. It's kind of it's part of their diplomatic mission. The boardroom, the director's box at Manchester City does host politicians fairly regularly, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's allowed to happen. And I do wonder whether, for the UAE to be showing its support to Turkey, to President Erdogan, who's recently won an election, that there were suggestions that some other regional leaders might attend. I don't know if they did. I don't think they did. There was certainly no sign of Mohammed bin Salman, who had been rumoured to be coming. It may have been that there was a political angle as well, that they thought, look, we have to make we have to show ourselves. We have to be there. We have to be present. We have to be on the ground, because there are other things because this is a chance to accomplish other things. It has a meaning beyond football, and in a way, that's entirely fitting. But yeah, I think mainly, if I had to guess, I'd say the main driving factor is that it would have been a much bigger story had he not gone.
Yeah, this game kicking off really weeks after the Emirates signed a $40 billion trade agreement with Turkey that was ratified after Erdogan's re-election there. But you don't tune in to this podcast for the geopolitics. We do occasionally talk about the football, and this game was meant to be one of the most epic mismatches of all time. We were told it was going to be a regal coronation. It ended up being really far more of a street fight. This is really a sweaty, adrenaline-filled bar brawl in which broken glasses, pool cues, people, everything apart from a Calvin Phillips had to be used to prevail and deliver the treble. And to begin with, the two centre-forwards at interplay, Dzeko and Lautaro Martinez, they seem to gnaw at City tactically and psychologically. It's not a formation that many Premier League teams play. It was much talked about before. The one that did beat City twice, albeit one was a dead rubber after they'd already run the league. Brentford. What was it, though, in your mind, that inhibited City? Was it nerves? Was it Inter's bravery? Or was it just exhaustion after the toll of a 307-day season?
A little bit of all three, I think. And the other thing that's important is that I wonder whether the fact that the Premier League tends to finish a little bit earlier than certainly Serie A and often most of Europe's other leagues, apart from maybe the Bundesliga. I do sometimes wonder whether that's a bit of a disadvantage for English teams in the final. The clearest example of that was actually the 2019 when Liverpool played Spurs, which was, I think, comfortably the worst final since 2003, which was Milan 0, Juventus 0. It's a classic. Watch it on YouTube. But neither Liverpool or Spurs looked anything like themselves that day, and they'd had a 3-week break between the last game in the Premier League and the Champions League final. And there was a little bit of that with City. They looked just a little bit rusty. They played in the FA Cup final a few days before, but that again is a specific game. You're not kind of in the rhythm of the season. Whereas Serie A had only finished at the same time as the cup final. Maybe that gives the continental sides a bit of an advantage. Mainly, I think City were nervous. They looked like they were really feeling the strain of what it would mean to win the treble. That for all that they have kind of sailed through the last quarter, the last third of the season, they are human. The players are human. They don't always look it, but they are, including the striker. They knew. I think that they were.
He pretends to be human, Ro.
He pretends to be human. He's a very realistic android.
Yeah, there's certain lights that he stands in occasionally, and I think maybe he is human.
He's certainly, been given a realistic human face, but I think that ultimately they are susceptible to those emotions, to that stress, to that pressure. There was a point in the first half where Pep Guardiola was sort of clawing at his own face in that Edvard Munch's The Stream way that he does, just City had done something wrong,
and shouted,
relax at his players. And you just think, that's very much do as I say, not as I do there, Pep.
No, mixed messages. I said on the podcast we take right after the final, I always find when I'm manic, angry, seething, about to lose my mind, someone shouting relax at me, it's like throwing a fire starter on a barbecue. It's a brave gambit. And it would get worse for City. The KDB agony, watching that gent fall to the turf, having to limp off just past the hour, that sad finger that he put into the air by the byline where he just said, it's over for me, wiggling it into the Istanbul night. And yesterday morning, news came out that Kevin De Bruyne, it's somewhat incredible, been playing for the last 2 months of the season with, quote, a severe hamstring tear, and down the stretch of the Premier League title race kept playing. The FA Cup kept playing with that. This game, a bridge too far. It reportedly completely snapped during the game, his hamstring. Just a reminder, if we needed one, we didn't need one. Not this. Awful, awful reminder to that man. Why? Why, Kev? Why? Just how much football has been played this season. The World Cup dumped down in the middle of it. And just how ground down these human beings we are watching for our entertainment are. Their hamstrings barely holding on by the sinew.
Yeah, obviously for De Bruyne, who was forced off with a head injury in 2021 as well, it was particularly poignant. And obviously Inter didn't want Kevin De Bruyne to be injured. That wasn't part of their game plan. I thought Inter were sort of, what's the word? They were canny and they were wily and they were occasionally a little bit niggly, but they weren't dirty particularly. Their main weapon seemed to be patience. I went into it thinking that the game would effectively be kind of a Helm's Deep situation where, this Thermopylae, but with diving. Where kind of into a sort of this resolute defensive
with diving. Action. You sound like a Hollywood scriptwriter pitching in studio. Just imagine it'll be Thermopylae, but with diving. Okay, we like it. We're green lighting this. We love it.
Who's attached? Francesco Acerbi. No thanks. But you kind of thought that the Inter would be sort of camped on the edge of the 18-yard box, and they basically say to City, "Come and break us down." To be honest, it was nothing like that. I thought Inter, in terms of executing a preordained plan, that is among the best performances in a final I have ever seen. I thought Inter were absolutely magnificent.
It's courageous. It really was. They were meant to sit deep, and that was the role they were meant to play. They were meant to take it, and instead they brought it. Got to say, my heart did break for KDB. Tragic to see him. Second Champions League final, as you say, leaving in agony. Massive player, then unable to influence events at all. I think the verb is having to Scott Carson the rest of the final. Phil Foden came on, but still Inter played on courageously. Lukaku, he ended up getting the crap, as we will discuss. But it was actually Lautaro Martinez who had the true time to charge in on goal in the 58th minute, speeding in on Ederson, had time to read the headlines, see his name in lights, then utterly crapped the bed. Ederson smothered a truly tame slap shot. Honestly, this moment, the more I watch it was like witnessing Luke Skywalker fail in his effort to shoot the proton torpedoes down the Death Star's thermal exhaust port.
That was Inter's plan. effectively. So Inter weren't spectacular. They didn't try and go toe to toe with Man City. They took the sting out of the game. They did all they could to kind of break the rhythm, delay. They took ages over every free kick, every corner, every throw in, and they were trying to shave the edges basically. And yeah, sometimes one of your opponent's best players gets injured, and that makes it doesn't level the playing field, as Man City is still Man City and Inter is still Inter, but it closes the gap a little bit. And what Inter were doing was saying, we can hold you at bay for as long as possible, and at some point we will get a chance. And that might be from a free kick, might be from a corner, might be on the counter attack, might be from a break. It might come from a mistake, and so it did. Lautaro Martinez goes through because Ederson and Manuel Akanji, I think, had a sort of breakdown in communication. It wasn't an easy finish. He did have Lukaku standing inside him, and who he could have passed to. And
doing
the ball,
2 hands out, I'm open after the fact.
And that ball would have been the right decision. You can see why Martinez went for it. Ederson played it perfectly, narrowed the angle. That was Inter's chance. That was everything they had been playing for. And at that stage in the game, they deserved it because they had done what very few teams have been able to do, and that is basically shut Manchester City down almost completely.
That was Inter's chance, and you miss your chance, and Manchester City will take theirs. That's what they do. And you wrote about the City goal, which came within 10 minutes of the Martinez miss. You wrote it didn't come as Manchester City might have dreamed, at the fantastical climax of some wondrous, intricate move, but with something more arbitrary, more human, a minor error, little more than a technical fault. Leave it open and swiftly punished at the doorway between one day and the next. I love that piece of writing, Raw. The DeMarco slip, the emphatic, decisive Rodri finish, like a giant Spanish ashtray roaring away, which should have his name now etched in City lore, like Aguero and company in seasons past.
Yeah, it was. That's how a lot of goals come. That there were 2 or 3, not random events, but slightly kind of arbitrary happenings in that move that allowed that goal to happen. The first one is Akanji's pass to Bernardo Silva is a good one, but Federico Di Marco cuts it out if he hadn't been caught in two minds about whether to close that run or to cover the overlap. He ends up doing neither, falls over, Silva has space. Silva's cross is deflected away, I think off a Cherby. Now that deflection could go anywhere. It's a matter of not even an inch, really. If it hits him slightly higher on the thigh, maybe it balloons up into the air. If it hits him slightly lower, maybe it rolls off straight back to Silva into live to fight another day. As it is, it falls straight to Rodri. Unerring finish, superb finish. And City had the breakthrough. City hadn't played particularly well. They had played hugely within themselves. It wasn't really even at the end of a concerted period of pressure. It was one attack, one slight mistake, one technical fault, one little slice of good fortune, or one bounce of the ball, and they had their lead, and they only had 20 more minutes to hold out. And that, I think, was a position that Inter were always going to struggle to come back from, except they kind of should have done.
Well, we will get to that, Raw. By the way, there's that camera angle from behind Rodri, an instinctive finish. Clearly just muscle memory kicking in, but the way that ball just curls inches past the shins of two astonished, impotent. Suddenly you can see their faces. We've got this. There's 2 of us. We're on the line. We're doomed. Oh, just the face. There's a whole movie of emotion in that incredible angle. And we do need to touch upon, for me, the player of the game, John Stones. I mean, if that man's name was Juan Stones, I mean, we would talk about
Juan
him.
Piedras.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Rory, bringing it today. But the longer the game went on, the more that man revelled. And there's an Evertonian who watched, and many newer listeners, many newer viewers of football will not know, this man survived Everton to experience and touch the mantle of greatness. 3 largely unappreciated seasons at Everton, because John Stones was a centre-back who could, play football. He could pass. He lived to play out the back, which is a dangerous game at Everton Football Club. We hated that. I mean, but the fans would scream when he was on the ball and he'd start in an Everton shirt. Can you imagine that? An Everton shirted central defender trying to, I've got the ball in my own box. I'm going to play out the back. And everyone would scream, just boot it, lad! I will say, watching him in those seasons play with flair and be mocked for it because Everton don't do flair. But to watch him on Saturday in Istanbul, step into the midfield and dominate the game, becoming, as he's now known as, Barnsley Beckenbauer, which is just a joyous nickname, but one which really contains, I think, the oxymoron of his existence. Because, yes, English players are always overrated by English fans. Teams that want them have to pay a premium. English talent. But they're also not truly appreciated at the same time. We kind of underappreciate them in equal measure. But Pep has made this man one of the most decisive players in Europe. It's his slide into midfield, Raw. That's been Manchester City's treble-winning death move.
Yep, that's the key. That's the thing that's changed everything. They were playing well. They were still Man City beforehand, but it's that move seems to have taken them to a new level, effectively. It's testament to Guardiola that he saw it, that he kind of imagined it and implemented it. It's interesting, actually, how many different influences there are in Guardiola's game. Obviously, everyone knows about the Cruyff sort of legacy, Barcelona, that he's taken a lot of pressing ideas from Marcelo Bielsa and from Germany. John Stones is basically playing as Matthias Sammer, the mid-90s German libero. That's the position he's playing. And that is not necessarily something you would have seen coming when you thought, I wonder what Guardiola will do at Manchester City. Will he take Matthias Sammer as his inspiration? You think, well, actually,
he's clearly going to take Matthias Sammer. Or if he doesn't, he's a fool.
In which Matthias Sammer's job was basically to be a central defender, a sweeper, who stepped forward and played as a libero to dominate and to kind of set the rhythm of the teams he played for, mainly Borussia Dortmund and Germany. That was the traditional position in German football, and Guardiola's basically reinvented it.
God, the way you describe it, it's Pep Guardiola as Mark Ronson just saying, you know what, I'm going to take the horns from this arcane 1980s record that no one can remember and make them live again.
Exactly. And I mean, that speaks really well of Guardiola, kind of the way he thinks about the game. But it's huge credit to John Stones and to the rest of the City team as well, who've been able to accommodate it and adapt and help Stones kind of make the most of that role. But it has showcased all of Stones' ability, his composure, his technical sort of proficiency, his vision, his silkiness. He quite often you see him beating players. And it does feel, to be honest, as though in the last 2 years, Guardiola has kind of invented two new positions. He has taken that idea that football is played in 4-4-2 or 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 or whatever it might be, and rendered it. So that's always been a bit of a shorthand. It's never been true. That's not what football looks like. But Guardiola's kind of rendered it irrelevant, because how do you describe John Stones' position? There was a period in the first half where, in the space of 2 minutes, he played at right back, central defence, central midfield, attacking midfield. And then I remember looking at him and thinking, well, he's on the left wing now. And I wrote down, John Stones is playing on the left wing. And I looked up and he was on the right wing, but kind of by the corner flag. And you're like, hang on, this man is just running everywhere. There's always a purpose. And I think to have a team that is capable of switching around to accommodate that is a triumph of coaching. But to have a player who can do it is a triumph of talent.
Oh, it's like an English remake of Being John Malkovich with John Stones in the Malkovich role. Malkovich, Stones. But time to go momentarily. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Romelu Lukaku. Poor Rom. We broke his story down in detail in the last episode of European Nights. This season, just the lack of confidence, the injuries, the savage gauntlet of Italian Serie A racism that he's had to brave. And in a year that has already seen him implode in Belgium's defeat at the World Cup, that was a human agony. Now this, blocking his own team's goal-bound header. Then following that up by late, I think it was the 88th minute, with the goal gaping close range, dispatching a header where Ederson could save it. And it feels at this point that trauma follows that man like snow falling on snow. Own goals in finals, massive misses in the World Cup. There's that meme of him blocking, I think it's a Sanchez shot on goal. And now this agony, Ro.
Yeah, it was hard not to feel for him. The one that he blocked from DiMarco, I think he doesn't need to feel too bad about, because I suspect Ruben Diaz would have got there. The header was it was not DiMarco's fault. The header was quite weak. There's a suspicion at the time that DiMarco might have been offside for the header that hit the bar. I don't think he was, to be perfectly honest. So even if Lukaku hadn't got in the way, I suspect that would not have been a goal. The miss, yeah, that was difficult to watch. What I would say on the flip side is that I actually thought that Lukaku improved Inter, as did Robin Gosens. DiMarco, I thought, was probably Inter's best player, but Robin Gosens gave them something extra down the left as well. And it's a shame that there isn't really a way for Inzaghi to accommodate both Robin Gosens and Fede DiMarco. But Lukaku played much better than Edin Dzeko. He provided much more of a threat. I think he'd had a shot within 2 or 3 minutes of coming on. It brought Martinez back to life, because Martinez didn't have a great final either. He seemed to relish playing alongside Lukaku a bit more than he relished playing alongside Dzeko. But sadly, that's not really how football works. And
none of this will he remember, Roy. No. None of this will he remember. He won't say, you know what, I improved them. I did with Gosens. I lifted. Well, I did better than Dzeko. He won't be like, Lautaro Martinez, you missed that earlier chance. It was
he might be like that.
Yeah, I don't think he is like that. I don't think
that's
what attracts Megan Thee Stallion. I think he's a human and vulnerable. He's been on our show. He is a sensitive, reflective, emotionally, deeply feeling human being. I mean, I really adore him. And you almost felt, again, projecting utterly, but that was an instinctive finish. He would have had like microseconds to a header he would have put away. In training session after if you spend any time on a training ground, you see them playing like late training. They're all just effing around. There's like little claps, little whistles, little adjustments, and the coaches, goals flying in from all angles. He would have put this goal away probably 5 million times over the course of the past seasons. But as that ball span towards him, you almost Slumdog Millionaired back every agony that Romelu has had to experience over the past couple of seasons. He's almost doomed. He's almost doomed to fail. No, I can't score this. My narrative is not the hero's narrative. How sweet that would have been. Romelu Lukaku, you will rise again. Please come back to Everton, you beautiful human being. The one club, guess bar West Brom, where you were really... and truly happy. But it was not to be. This was not to be the Lukaku redemption story. It could never be the Lukaku redemption story, because you wrote before the game how City will not be stopped. You wrote something quite brilliant before the final. You noted that at the end of season 3 of Ted Lasso, spoiler alert, in all other aspects, you said a determinedly romantic and uplifting show, an unabashed underdog story of empowerment and personal growth, and the overwhelming power of nice. Even in that, Manchester City still wins the Premier League, even though Richmond beat them. Your point was, even in fiction, this Manchester City juggernaut cannot be dislodged. But we do need to know the XG, Rory, the expected goals, and not just because I'm contractually obligated to do product placement for your excellent book of the same name, but the XG for this game. Do you know what it was, Rory?
Is it Inter's was 1.58 and City's was 0.9 or something?
Close, but worse. Manchester City's expected goals 0.95. They scored 1 goal. Inter did not score, but their XG was 2.07.
Well, I mean, that's the Lukaku chance, and yes, Martinez, and I think the Gosens header late on as well. They and DiMarco, yeah, they had. It sounds like it will sound to Man City fans like sour grapes. It will sound to everybody else like deliberate contrarianism. It really isn't. I thought Inter played that game perfectly. They made a conscious decision to play in a certain way. They pulled it off. They did everything Simone Inzaghi could possibly have asked of them. But sometimes that's what football is, that one team gets the bounce and the other team can't take its chances or doesn't get the bounce. It's not to say Man City don't deserve it. They absolutely do. It's not to say that that Inter were robbed. They weren't. That's just the nature of football. And I think most fans, although you don't often see it expressed on social media, understand that City didn't get lucky. That would be pushing it too far. But yeah, if Inter had won that game, then I think it would have been absolutely fair to say Inter worked out how to play against Manchester City. They pulled it off perfectly and they got what they deserved. That they didn't doesn't mean that the performance was wrong, and it doesn't mean the performance was bad. The result doesn't necessarily define the performance.
City win only their second European piece of silverware tchotchke in the club's 143-year history. What was fascinating to me was at the final whistle, the City players, they didn't charge around in glory, wide-eyed glory, as we are conditioned to see. They fell to the turf too, just like the exhausted, shattered Inter players. City players too buried their faces in the grass. You always felt a sense of sheer exhaustion, of the toll, the pressure, the weight of expectation lifting. Rui, what was the mood like in the press box in that final whistle moment?
Well, I was in a kind of weird, slightly international press box with some of my American colleagues and quite a lot of Portuguese people. So we were just, it was quite calm, to be honest. I think once City had scored, you kind of figured, right, I can commit now to what I'm doing. I know that they're going to win. Lukaku maybe should have changed that, and it would have been a bit more panicked had that happened. But it was obvious, really, certainly from the point that Lukaku missed that chance, that this was City's, and so you knew what was coming, and in that moment, it's always the best idea is from a journalistic point of view is to watch, see what happens, see who does what. That's really important to see what it's like to watch them celebrate. I felt really sorry for the Inter players. And I felt absolutely delighted for the Manchester City players. As you said, there's two ways of understanding Manchester City. There's what they do on the pitch, and there's what they represent off it. But there's a third one that probably is the most important, to be honest, certainly in a moment like that, and that's the human side of it. That you have got a group of players and substitutes who have spent years working towards winning all of these honours, for whom this is their reward for all of their hard work, regardless of what's happened, what the club has done, regardless of the validity or otherwise of the charges, regardless of Pep Guardiola's tactical genius. If you're İlkay Gundogan and you've come back from injury, or if you're Ruben Diaz and you've worked your way up from Benfica's academy, if you're Jack Grealish and you moved 2 years ago for £100 million and ultimately thought your first season was a bit of a disappointment. If you're Erling Haaland and you would, the moment you came out of the laboratory, this was in your programming. Like, this is what they have all been trying to do. And it's impossible not to be pleased for them. Whatever you think about the club itself, in that moment, they had achieved their dream. And I have spent time with İlkay Gundogan, and his success, I guess I feel most appreciative of, because it means something to me that he's won. I think he's a wonderful human being. He's a lovely man. He deserves it. So I think it's important we remember that there is a human side to the players. And the other thing is, there's a human side to the fans. On my flight out to Istanbul, which was from Manchester, full of Manchester City fans, as you'd expect. And there was a fella who didn't want to sit down too early because it was a long flight. And he said, I'm going to sit down when they tell me to sit down. I'm not sitting down before they tell me to sit down. And he sort of looked back at him, looked back through the plane of sky blue shirts and said, oh, from Mactown to Istanbul. And that has now become a bit of a cliche, that the places that Manchester City fans are claiming to have played when they were in League One are getting more and more obtuse. It's kind of
Mactown being Macclesfield Town. You hear about Port Vale, trips to Port Vale away, getting beat.
The volcanic island of Surtsey, from the volcanic island of Surtsey to Istanbul. I
think they played a game on the island of Sodor away once or twice.
Yeah, exactly. Sodor away, Mordor in the cup.
And it rained.
They can't all have been there. They can't all have been at Gillingham. They can't all have been at Macclesfield Town. But I think certainly to a generation of fans, and to the fans who have been brought up by that generation of fans, there is still for them, this is the culmination of a dream.
Agree. We had Noel Gallagher on the show. I remember I used to go and watch Man City a lot. My Manchester side of the family were all Blues, and I'd go and watch them against Grimsby Town. Main Road, and it was both miserable and deeply, deeply joyful and magical. We had Noel Gallagher on, and they become magical, these memories. You'd be like, yeah, we played Macclesfield Town away, and me and Liam had to walk home from the game, and we'd like Google Map how far away it was. It was like 187 miles. Or, it didn't matter whether it happened or it didn't happen. It felt like it happened, and to have this happen, the exact opposite, is truly magnificent. And they deserve it. And
it's hard not to be happy for those fans as well. And look, as a journalist, you get a lot of grief from Man City fans for not being sufficiently on board with the project. But on a human level, I know a lot of City fans. I've got mates who are big City fans, and I'm delighted for them. Genuinely delighted for them. Seeing your team win the European Cup is special, regardless of the circumstances.
Seeing my team win the Florida Cup was incredibly special.
Exactly.
We will break down elements of this now. Thank you for watching our crap show. We appreciate it more than I can say. Please take a minute, drop a like on this video if you're enjoying it. But without further ado, here's a lot more Pep. Well, we need to start at the beginning, really. Pep Guardiola is white whale speared, his third Champions League victory secured, a full 12 years after his second at Barcelona. Also the first coach to win 2 trebles, again, first at Barcelona. But this was his first Champions League win without that human cheat code, Lionel Messi, Inter Milan's Lionel Messi, as we will discuss. But what does this mean? At the very least, To me, the English brickbat Fraudiola, which is oft-tweeted still, cannot truly be flung at him again. This win, as Pep has been hinting, he'd hope, I think, that this is seen as his true masterpiece. The Guardian reporting this morning that Pep will leave when his contract is up at City in 2 years' time in 2025, which would make it 9 years at Manchester City. They're starting to feel the message is there's a case he has nothing more to prove. But question from a viewer, GFOP at Aaron P. Levine, wants to know, now that Pep's done all he can with City, would you say the odds of him coming to the US men's national team are high, extremely high, or just a sure thing? Does any part of you, Rory, see him quitting on a high, Rory? I'm asking for a friend.
I think there is an argument that if you were advising Pep Guardiola, there is an argument you would say you could walk away now. I think that is absolutely true, that you've done the treble, you will, by definition, history suggests you won't do that again. This is, if you want to leave on a strong note, then you walk away now. And for what it's worth, I'd have said exactly the same to Jurgen Klopp a year ago. I would have said, look, just that's it. Just say this is done. Or maybe say I'm going to leave in a year for the transition. With Guardiola, I think he's such a perfectionist. I think he's such an obsessive. And I think he has such an absolute conviction in his own brilliance that my guess is he will look at this as objective obtained, and that he will now think, I bet I can go and do that again. That would be the challenge he'd set himself. No one's ever done consecutive trebles. No one. So go and do that. He's still only won 3 European Cups. And that isn't, I mean, that's a lot of European Cups. But, it's more than Frank Lampard as a manager. But I think there will be part of him that maybe thinks that he needs a 4th and a 5th to really cement the way he sees himself. And that isn't meant to sort of imply that he's arrogant. I think he is arrogant, because all great managers are arrogant. But I think he would be thinking, hang on, I haven't won as many European Cups as Carlo Ancelotti. Maybe I should go and outstrip that. On the other hand, 9 years at a team is a long, long time. It's a really long time. He did 4 at Barcelona, he did 3 at Bayern. The difference with City, I think, is that everything's been built for him. It was a blank canvas that has been designed according to his specifications, effectively. And crucially, there's none of the pressures and the politics that you get at older, more established teams. Everyone at City has bought into the vision of Khaldoun Al-Mubarak, the chairman, Ferran Soriano, the chief executive. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone sings from the same hymn sheet. There's no what they call at Barcelona. There's no entorno. There's no kind of environment. There's no backbiting or politicking or manoeuvring or scheming, because everyone knows it is run, like an autocracy. And I think Guardiola benefits from that hugely professionally, because it means that he has a clear kind of chain of command. He knows who he has to talk to. He's got allies in all of the senior positions. It's a hugely pressurized job. It's a hugely intense job for a hugely intense man. But I don't think the pressures are or the stress, I don't think is anything like it is at Barcelona or Bayern Munich. And he will, I'm sure, value that. I don't think he will step down. Well, I'd be staggered if he stepped down this summer. It wouldn't surprise me too much if he maybe said, actually, do you know what, 2025's about right? That's nearly a decade. I don't think anyone could complain particularly if that was the case. But for now, my guess is he'll be thinking, well, look, that gives me 2 years. Can I do 2 more trebles?
God, which is the point of this Manchester City project. That's where we kind of come to. I do need to acknowledge it's a strange glory. It's a cold glory. Unless you're a Manchester City fan, I think the Guardian's great cartoonist David Squires really captured this strange clinical feeling best when he depicted a howling Pep, that kind of Pep who's watching a near miss on the sideline, grabbing his head in agony, screaming, "What is it about our relentlessly dominant sports washing project that people don't want to? Do they hate winners? Is that it?" And it makes me realise next year's Champions League final is going to be at Wembley. There was a really telling post-game conversation between Thierry Henry and Erling Haaland, where Henry pointed out that Haaland still needs to learn to spin right off his defenders, and if he does, he'll be unstoppable. And Haaland, quite brilliantly, said, "You will forget, I'm still just 22. There's still so much more to me before I hit my prime," was his message. That's from a man who scored 52 goals this season, not yet in his prime. It made me wonder, should we all stop, dreaming about silverware and just surrender to our new robot overlords? When Pep said post-game, we are just 13 Champions League wins behind them, So be careful, Real Madrid. We are on our way. He's joking. And he's not joking, right? Did they just win the Champions League again and again and again now, like they did the Premier League?
Well, so the thing is, they can't do that. And even though they have all these sort of structural inbuilt advantages that are well documented, that everybody knows, that City are a team that can afford whichever player it wants, basically. It doesn't always buy the most expensive players, but if there's a player it wants, it has the money to go and get them. That's not true of everybody. It has an ability to kind of design itself for certain specific things, which other clubs are just too big and unwieldy to do. So, yeah, the best example of that is this is a club that has been built so that Pep Guardiola has everything he wants. If he says, look, actually what I now believe is that we need to sort of disband the academy and send everybody to work in shops, they'll do it, not a problem. That's not available to other clubs. They have that that sort of unity of purpose that isn't always the case elsewhere. It maybe should be the case elsewhere, but it clubs are big, difficult, tricky things. It's hard to institute that kind of sort of straight line thinking. I think at a lot of places they have potentially, not always decided that the rules are for them, which has helped as well. That's the allegation, which City deny. We should deny it strenuously. They haven't produced their irrefutable body of evidence to prove their innocence. They don't know why. It must be the photocopy must be broken or something. The problem is that it's football and football's arbitrary. City have been the best team in the world, certainly since 2020 maybe. And they've only won one Champions League, and that's because stuff happens. And sometimes Francesco Acerbi deflects it and it goes somewhere else, and Lautaro Martinez scores that goal, and Inter Milan win that game 1-0, despite being nowhere near as good as
maybe in
Manchester
a parallel
City
dimension it did
overall. Exactly, and that will eventually stop. That might eventually stop Man City next year. Maybe in the quarterfinals, they get two really bad injuries and a dodgy red card, and then all of a sudden they get knocked out by Bayern Munich. It happens. There were times in recent memory where it's looked like Bayern might win the Champions League 2 or 3 times in a row. Well, the great Barcelona team only won it twice in 4 years under Guardiola and once under Luis Enrique. It is hard to be the dominant team in European football consistently every season. The flip side of that is that now that they've broken the seal, I think the nerves go away. They know they can do it. They have done it. They have summited the mountain once. That makes it means you know the route, and that makes it easier. And the other thing is that there is no reason to believe that they won't compete next season to the same level. There's no reason to believe there will be some sort of drop off, other than, and this is a very slight asterisk, the physical exertion of this season might take its toll because, as you say, it has been a really long season. They had lots of players at the World Cup. They've played 60-plus games. Obviously, they got knocked out of the League Cup, I think, in the quarterfinals. So they've played every game apart from 3 that were available to them. So by my maths, that means they've played 61 games this season. Generally, when that's happened before, to Man City after 2019 and to Liverpool after last season, you do see a physical drop-off the following year. So that might, we're in relatively uncharted territory. We have to get used to. We're in relatively uncharted territory. Barney Ronay did a great piece in The Guardian, one that I'm going to have to stop reading Barney Ronay because he depresses me, but just of his talent rather than just of what he's saying. But he made the point that it's very hard to assess Guardiola's greatness, the greatness of City's achievements, because we are not in a world that is the same as before. This treble is different to Man United's treble, just as Bayern Munich's treble in 2020 is different to Bayern Munich's treble in 2013, just as Barcelona's second treble was different to its first treble. Just as all of those trebles, in fact, are different to Celtic's treble in 1967 or Ajax's in 1972 or PSV Eindhoven's in 1987, the world is different, and it makes it really hard to gauge what greatness looks like because that so few teams gather so few teams harvest so many trophies that the bar has shifted, and we're still not entirely sure where it is. The difference, I think, that plays in City's favour is traditionally there would be a drop-off, that this would be the pinnacle, and it would be really hard to recapture that level because of innately human things. The players will be satisfied. The players have done it. Perhaps they'll lose a bit of their edge or whatever it might be. With City, that doesn't have to happen because they have everything available to them to mean that
it
won't, and that is different.
From the very early mid City, I went and interviewed Vincent Company, and he said our greatest opponent is not other teams, it's complacency, and we're designed to shatter complacency. We will see that City are the tradition dictates they will fall off. This is a tradition shattering team. You mentioned the 115 alleged breaches of Premier League rules that the Premier League themselves have charged Manchester City with, yes, and Everton too. In a slightly very different bowels of the table reality. Those charges could rumble on for Manchester City for 2 to 4 years before we find out what's to come of them. But it is a massive shadow casting asterisk thing. The social media hashtag Lance Armstrong FC is everywhere. And we do have to talk about this victory through the prism of geopolitics. City became the 23rd club to win this competition, but the very first nation-state-owned club to do so. For this victory to occur in a season in which we've lived through really the surreal bizarrety of the Qatar World Cup, when Saudi Arabia is currently vacuuming up every massive name player they can lure to the Al Hilals and Al Nassers, while vying to win the bid for the 2030 World Cup. And now this, an Abu Dhabi team funded up to the gills, wins the Champions League. It's been the strangest season in recent memory. It's now finished, Rory. Does it feel in the process, somewhere along this way, that we've gone past the point of no return, that perhaps the flicker of protest ahead of Qatar's World Cup or Newcastle's takeover by Saudi Arabia will just be now drowned out? Have we entered a whole new era, one in which football's powers that be have almost irrevocably now bent the knee to the money, to the power of the Gulf?
Yes and no. So I think, yes, it has felt like this season, between those three things, the Qatar World Cup, City winning the treble, and Saudi's increasing kind of presence within football, either through Newcastle or through the PIS plan to turn the Saudi Premier League into a top 10 league in the world through Karim Benzema. It does feel like something has kind of changed, that we are now becoming stuff that has been bubbling under the surface is now there. It's kind of going from liquid to gas, or whatever happens, to continue that metaphor. That this is now a different reality. It feels like passing from one day to the next. Ultimately, that this has all come to fruition, and yeah, it feels essentially like there's very little anyone can do about it, except that there is, because, and this is where I think fans themselves have to think about what they want from the game, and they have to make that really difficult thing of separating what's good for their club and therefore good for them, and what's good for everybody. Football has a problem because it is weak, and football is weak because it has no regulation. There is nothing to stop this stuff happening. There are no checkpoints. There's no guardrails. There's nothing to say that any actor can come in and co-opt football for their own ends. And look, I think we talked about this last week, that it's perfectly valid if you're a Man City fan or a Newcastle fan or a PSG fan. If all you care about is that your club can buy players, that's fine. That's up to you. You live your life however you want. No one can criticise you for that. It's not personal. The objection to what's happened at City, to what's happened at Newcastle, to what's happened at PSG, to the Qatar World Cup, is not personal. It's not that we hate Manchester City. It's not that we hate Paris Saint-Germain or Newcastle. City and Newcastle certainly are probably were traditionally two of the most liked clubs in England by everybody else. And sometimes that probably felt patronising, and I'm sure that they would both happily trade all of that kind of affection for trophies. But there's nothing personal about it towards the fans, towards the clubs. It's purely and simply that football is at a point where it has to decide what it wants to be. Does it want to be a competition that is defined by who has the most money and which nation can throw the greatest portion of its weight behind its emissary in football, whether that's Newcastle or City or PSG or whoever else is bought by Brunei or Venezuela or China or whoever it might be, or the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund gets involved and buys Darlington? Or does it want to have a conversation about making sure that this game that does belong to everybody is played for everybody and is not played simply for the benefit of a handful of regimes who've decided that for now, and that's crucial, for now, it suits their ends to be involved? Because there is a point where Abu Dhabi might say, do you know what, we don't need this anymore. So we're going to pull whatever it is that we are giving to Man City at that point out, and they'll just have to stand on their own 2 feet as the club with the highest revenue in world football, which, Sure, those two things aren't related, but same with PSG, same with Newcastle. What happens if they lose interest? What if there's a coup? What if the political prerogative changes, as we saw with China? Inter Milan are a case study in why we should be careful with where the money comes from and what that money is trying to do with football. And I think fans have to start wondering, reckoning with themselves, really, where they stand on that conversation. Because yeah, it's glamorous and it's exciting, and this transfer window this summer will have lots of huge numbers in it, and Newcastle will unveil all these players, and PSG will do the same, and City will make one or two big moves, and it'll all be exciting. Is that what we want football to be? Is that a healthy vision for how football should be? That keeps everybody involved.
It's very rational, and then the football comes on, and we forget all of that. But come on, Union Gillois, enough about Europe, Rory. Let's talk quickly about the new epicenter of world soccer, and by that I mean Miami, city which gave the world Scarface, the Golden Girls, and Ballers. I think Lionel Messi loved Ballers. Now has Messi.
Love the Golden Girls.
Fire up the Golden Girls, he says after another exhausting PSG game.
Antonella, hay una otra serie de Golden Girls.
You know, the Daily Mirror posted an inside look at his apartment. It's meant to be Porsche themed. I just love it if they redecorate it and just go all in on the Golden Girls, recreate the set and live in it. It would be beautiful. But over here, Rory, I don't need to tell you, we are all so bloody giddy. Messi now rides with us. His impact has been immediate into Miami. Suddenly have the biggest Instagram following of any sports team in the United States, and that includes NFL and NBA clubs. Ticket prices are soaring. I think, plus 1,400% for Inter Miami games. Inter Miami jerseys. This team are bottom of the table. Who cares? Sold out. Lots of noise here in the United States, where this is a major, major coup by MLS, make no mistake. But how is it being viewed from the perspective of England, where Messi in Ligue 1 in France was Farmers League?
Yeah, I think, funny enough, he's been helped in that by the fact that he's turned down the Saudis. I think if he'd gone to Saudi Arabia, it would have really impacted the way he was perceived, because rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, there's one of the dividing lines between Messi and Ronaldo in terms of popular perception has always been that Ronaldo is much more self-consciously kind of first class. Messi seems a little bit more grounded, a little bit more humble. Whether that is reflected in their actual personalities, I'm not sure. I suspect that the line is a lot blurrier. But the fact that he turned down the Saudi money, I think, plays massively in his favour. And that's been the main focus rather than... That's been the main focus in England. In Europe, it's much more broadly that he's not gone back to Barcelona. That's what they've kind of picked up, especially in Spain, as you can imagine. But in England, I think it's largely he's gone to the US for what we can interpret as fairly intelligent commercial reasons, rather than simply saying, I want $500 million for 2 years' work to Al Hilal or whoever. I think we understand that the US is a market he feels he can tap. I think there is an appreciation that he has completed football. He has done everything he could possibly want to do in Europe. Why not go somewhere where you own property and there's a huge Argentinian community and it's closer to home and it's in the same time zone. There will be some scoffing when he makes his debut about the standard of his opponents. Maybe not as much as there was when say Beckham or Henry went. I think there is an understanding now that MLS is not a joke competition. It wasn't then. I think. We're a few years behind the US, so we tend to work out things quite slowly. There will be question marks over playing on artificial turf, and I personally suspect he has underestimated the size of the United States. I think when he looks on a map and sees how far away Portland is, he might get a bit of a shock. But I think generally there's been a lack of sniggering about Messi going to MLS, because we understand, it's a huge market. He's incredibly famous, and crucially, he wants to play in 2026. It's the sign that he wants to play in that World Cup. He is going 3 years ahead of time so that he is ready for it.
He's come to organise the chairs, make sure all the jellos are set. It's going to be a party, Messi's party. But Raw, I've got to factually correct you. You've not completed football until you've won the CONCACAF Champions League. I did love at Makalali Jackson's tweet future resume of the social director for Inter Miami, increased Inter Miami's social media following by 1,600%, became the most followed MLS club during my first year of employment by developing robust social strategy. Midway into 2023 MLS season, Godspeed. Let us have our joy. It is deeply significant, but Raw's last one for the season. Tell the people what they want to know. What was the best thing you ate in Istanbul?
So we went for a tasting menu, as previously discussed, which was superb. An art gallery and library called Salt in Beyoğlu, which is one of the nicest bits of Istanbul. But what I say, I went to a restaurant called Develi, I think in Nişantaşı, which is a very kind of high-end part of Istanbul. And it was the sort of place where we sat down and they just brought us food. There was no menu produced. There was just food suddenly. Hummus and like a pink hummus and something with bulgur wheat and tomatoes, and then just an enormous platter of meat. And I ate that, I think, at about 3:30. Tricky with a 10 o'clock kickoff to know when to have dinner. Ate that about 3:30, and I would say I was still full by Monday afternoon.
I don't know how you say meat sweats in Turkish, but I got them vicariously just by listening to you. Rory, it has been some season, the longest year in many ways. I wish you strength and health as we charge already towards the start, the first day of the Premier League season, August 12th, with a Women's World Cup to savour before that. To you, Rory, to your health, to your strength and happiness. One last quick shout out, raising a shot of Jägermeister, this bolt of human emotion in a shot glass. To our old friend Claudio Ranieri, ex-Leicester, and just about every Premier League team in crisis since then. He's been written off, discarded, erased from our memories, but he will not stop bringing the joy in any way he knows how, leading Cagliari to promotion for the third time in his career there, this time back to the big time via the Serie A playoffs, courtesy of a 91st minute goal, which left the 71-year-old manager in tears. Proof it's never too late, listeners. You are never finished. You always have something to give in life. And Rory, thank you for giving us so much this season.
It's been an absolute pleasure, as you know. I am genuinely impressed that at what I think is 9:10 your time, you have genuinely just taken a shot of Jägermeister.
You know what, mate? I'm 73% made up. Some days it's only the Jägermeister that's keeping me going. This is Rog saying thank you for listening to this bonus episode of European Nights presented by Paramount Plus. Oh, let's all be like Claudio Ranieri. To more joy, big love, and as they say in Cagliari, coraggio. Courage. Beautiful viewers, we really hope you enjoyed today's episode. UGFOP is really the reason why we do what we do. For more suboptimal content like this, remember, subscribe, click the bell to be notified about all future videos. Big love from me. Courage. Subscribe here for more Men in Blazers videos and courage.